Today on the Mr. Maple podcast, Tim and Sean discuss using Japanese maples for color and texture in your garden.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Tim.
And I'm Sean.
And guys, we've got a great podcast for you today. Guys, whenever it comes to gardening, people always wonder how to use colors and textures in their landscape. So let's talk today about landscaping and gardening with colors and textures. And later in the podcast, we're going to be discussing how you can use these colors and textures with over 20 Japanese maples to make a certain mood in the garden and how to landscape and garden with those Japanese maples.
This is a really fun topic for me. I really like that we put this together because a lot of times with gardening, we have Fun Flower Friday, so we got stuff that blooms. But a lot of times when people do garden design, first thought goes to is what kind of flower do I want? What color bloom? And I think a lot of times the aspect of foliage being used in the garden gets left out. And with these Japanese maples, you get so many different colors and textures and sizes that you can really allow foliage to be your performer in your garden. So this is a really fun topic.
Gardening itself, it's so beneficial for everybody. People love gardening, and there's a lot of reasons why. Getting outdoors and just the physical exercise itself is good for you physically. It's a form of exercise. But it's good for your mental health. It can reduce stress. It can reduce your blood pressure. There's so many great aspects to gardening.
Absolutely. I love nothing more than getting out there. And a lot of times people want to rush stuff. And what I really love about gardening is it really gets you just to slow down to appreciate and let time do its thing.
It's calming.
It is. It really, like you said, stress reliever, helps with, if you have heart issues or anything like that, it's a great way just to slow the world down.
Oddly enough, just getting your hands in the soil can put you in contact with a microbacterium, a specific type that can cause serotonin to release in your brain. So you can get this positive, happy chemical, this natural antidepressant just from putting your hands into the soil. And so there's a reason why people get addicted to gardening. There's so many things that God's put out there that's made it amazing for us. And it's such a release. People all the time have these gardens to relax, these gardens for healing. And the social aspect, the mental health aspect, it's such a fun way to express yourself. And it's art, but it feels like it's a higher form of art. Art itself is very set in stone, and people display art, and gardening is a living form of art that is ever changing, that you just get to keep building on. And that's one of the reasons people love bonsai, but that's also one of the reasons people love gardening as well. I know that Matt and I, we'd go visit one of our friends in Wilton Farms in Virginia, and Miss Daniels is an artist, but she paints with her garden. And she has entire gardens devoted to, this is my white garden. This is my yellow garden. Y'all know I love the yellow garden. And everything in that garden either has yellow foliage or yellow blooms. And she is very meticulous on where she puts the plants and how she does things. And so gardening can really be that art form that you can really enjoy. And Japanese maples are a great way to accomplish that.
It's funny you say art form because really gardening is you got a blank canvas. And you can paint it however you want to. And it's funny you say that because you know how many artists and musicians are into gardening? Because it not only is it calming, but it also allows you to be creative. There's the creative aspect where you can have a little control over placement and putting stuff with those colors and textures and all those things so it brings out that not just calming and relaxing, but hey, I get to be an artist.
Well, a lot of y'all may know Sean. Y'all remembered him playing at the open house a few years ago. But he's an artist in the Carolina Drifters. He's the one that often edits all of our podcasts and gets the audio perfectly and really makes it an awesome experience for everybody. But they don't know about your landscaping background.
No, so prior to coming to Western North Carolina, that's what I did for a living was garden design. And so, I mean, you get all different types of customers where you want something to be real rigid, where you think they want a line of boxwoods or something like that. But then you get those customers where they want that wild, where they want something to be a little bit out of control, something that zips. And then you find people that are in the middle that want something that kind of sparkles here, but wants something, which is fun with garden design, where you can create different gardens within the same garden, different beds within the same garden that evoke different types of feelings. I can go to this part of the property and this makes me feel this way. Then I can go to this part of the property and it makes me feel completely different.
So let's go ahead and get into the color psychology of gardening, because oddly enough, the same color psychology that applies to in so many aspects of life also applies to gardening, and a lot of this applies with Japanese maples. I mean, we're going down the colors here. So when you've got a green plant out there in the landscape, what does that symbolize? What does that feel like?
So, I mean, it's very natural, stable, fresh, new, clean.
It's lively.
Life.
So with green plants, and specifically green Japanese maples, you've got that green summery feel that they use in Japanese gardening. You've got that green summery feel. It's lively. That is basically a representation of nature in this garden. And that's exactly what they do with traditional Japanese gardening. Is the green is one of the most important colors in the garden because it just represents nature. And then as that fall approaches with the Japanese maple, you can get some amazing fall colors that really distinguish and announce the coming of the seasons. And that's just one of the best things about green whenever it comes to that color. It's one of the most common colors, but it's also one of the most underappreciated colors because of what it actually provides in the garden.
Absolutely. With green, when you look into a garden, you see green. No one ever says something's wrong with that plant. When they see green, they're thinking that's a healthy plant. It's when you get into some of these other colors, someone says, "Oh, hey, something's wrong," or something, or it's acting weird. But when you see that green, no one ever says, "Oh, something's wrong."
But when you're dealing with green in a garden, don't deal with the same color green.
Right.
There's light shades of green, mid shades of greens, dark shades of greens, and all of those can be used to contrast each other so well. So, I mean, that green is an amazing color, and the color psychology of that natural, prosperous, that freshness, that calm, I mean, that just adds so much in the garden.
Absolutely. Now with this next one, you're dressed appropriate for this next one, the color yellow.
Guys, y'all know I love the color yellow. It's one of the reasons I love it. It's lively. It gives you that happy, cheerful, optimistic feel. And it just brings to life the rest of the colors in the garden because of the color contrast. I mean, yellow is one of those plants that complements green so well. It complements red so well. It complements purple so well. It complements all the colors in the color spectrum so well and really adds such color contrast. And that's one of the reasons I love the color yellow. It does so much in the landscape and garden.
I'm just excited that there's a lot more yellow fans out there. For the longest time, you really didn't see a lot of yellow, especially in trees. You didn't see a lot of yellow out there in the landscape. And it's just exciting to see a lot more of it coming out now. People are using it. It's such a great color.
Well, I think the reason that was because when people were first really, not really into gardening that much around, the United States, and they saw the color yellow, they often thought, oh, that plant has got an iron deficiency. Oh, that plant's not doing well. But then there's been these yellow trees that are so purely yellow. It's just so beautiful. And that is what's really changed people's minds. I mean, you look at some of these Japanese maples that are bright, bright yellow, and you can't help but love them because of what they can do out there in the landscape and garden. They can brighten up those dark places in the garden. They can take those places in the landscape where there's just greens and give you just another shade of yellow, a yellow out there that helps you see every shade of green in the landscape. And that yellow, that happy, cheerful feel, I mean, that is just amazing to be able to put out there in the garden.
Absolutely, absolutely. I also like that with yellow that you can, like you brought it up, but you can contrast it with that green, and it helps with that layering aspect to give gardens depth.
Yeah, that is so true. And it was just funny because I've always loved the color yellow, and it always made me feel happy. And that's the reason I have the yellow dance. People laugh whenever I'm doing the yellow dance, whenever I'm around a yellow plant. But it's because of that cheerful feel that color can provide out there in the garden. It's what they can provide out there in the greenhouse, in the landscape. And it's amazing. And that depth that you were talking about, how you can use the yellow to then see off in the distance because if you have that yellow in the foreground or up close, it's amazing what that yellow can do. And I think if you bring that yellow closer, the garden may seem a little smaller, but then by putting it out further in the distance, the garden appears much, much larger.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now this next one, the first time I saw a tree that was white, completely blew my mind.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many wet trees nowadays that are variegated with that white and so many amazing selections. But it gives you like this purity feel. It gives you like this calm. It's really awesome.
It makes me think of doves. It's what, like you see what I think of doves, and it's that calmness, it's that peace, it's that, and and that's that white color. That's what you associate. That's why you see doves used in ceremonies because of that white, that peaceful. You see them, the symbolism of white. It's a real strong color.
It's just elegant. And again, it contrasts so well. So it provides a really good color contrast out there in the landscape. But these whites can really brighten up those dark spaces in the garden. And you have a dark area, you add a white to it, and then all of a sudden you've got this amazing tree that becomes a focal point because how much brightness it brings in the garden.
Absolutely, especially when the sun shines off of it and hits it and kind of goes through those leaves and around those leaves. It just pops.
So our next color we're talking about is red. And let's consider this more of that bright red because there are different shades of the red when it comes to Japanese maples, but they're very, very different things. I mean, there's a very big difference between a DeSojo red, a Red Dragon red, and a Bloodgood red. And so that brighter picked up red, that is just an amazing, exciting color.
Oh, I mean, red. What do you think of? You think of love, passion, fire, heat, and you mentioned all those different cultivars with different shades of red. Just like you can with the green, you can use those different shades together with those maples as well to create depth and texture. And you got the lace leaves, you've got uprights. There's so many that those reds, use them together.
And it's funny because when people talk about Japanese maples, when Matt and I were at tailgate markets, they would always say, "Oh, I've got a red one and I've got a green one." What do you have those? And it's like we've got thousands of Japanese maples, and because of that, there are so many different selections that have so many amazing colors. And the red is the most sought after in the United States. You go and see someone's garden, there's going to be often a red Japanese maple in their garden. And because of that, there's not only this color psychology going on with those red Japanese maples, but often there's a psychology going on, whether they realize it or not, where they associate that with, being similar to their neighbor, but also associating that with, I went to my grandma's garden and she had a big red Japanese maple and I love that plant. And I also want a red Japanese maple for people to love in my garden as well. And Matt and I, we got off the school bus so much, working in our grandmother's garden. A lot of that comes from that where we see a red Japanese maple because my grandmother had this huge red Japanese maple in the middle of her yard. And we just loved it. I mean, it was just one of those things that was just a piece of our memories. And there's a lot of people who have that with these red Japanese maples because it is the most sought after color when it comes to the Japanese maples.
And hopefully we can bring some attention to these cultivars that you can use, because it's funny you say that color, because when I did landscape design, one of the first things people would say, especially when it came to Japanese maples, they'd say, "I want a Japanese maple." Okay, do you know what kind of Japanese maple do you want? Well, I want a red or a green. And it was either I want a red one, a green one, upright, a weeper, lace leaf. Those were your options. But that a lot of people don't realize how many different cultivars there are that give you that red. There are so many different cultivars that you don't have just to go with your blood good like your neighbor has. You can really distinguish your garden with those same colors, with those same looks, with completely different cultivars.
That is so true. And then you get from that shade of red to a shade of purple. And like we're talking like purple ghost, Amage Shiguri. We're talking, dark ghost, dark night. We're talking purple plants. And those just give you this mysterious feel, especially with that reticulated variegation. Just give you that mysterious feel. They give you like this royalty kind of a feel.
It's funny, like you mentioned purple ghost, and with purple ghost, the first time I saw purple ghost, it was kind of like, is that for real? Is that a real tree? Do trees really put off that color purple? Because you look at pictures and stuff like that, but to actually see it in person and see like, holy cow, that really is that color purple is really, really cool.
Yeah, it just gives you this glamorous, noble feel. And that's the reason why I love a lot of purple trees, is because that can really add a unique color psychology out there in the garden. It gives you a unique mood that really transforms your garden very quickly. Next, we've got the color blue with Japanese maples. No, just plain. Next, we've got orange. Now with orange, we've got some spring color oranges, and we've got some trees that go to orange in the fall. There's no Japanese maples currently that stay orange. They may put on orange new growth, orange red new growth, but they don't stay orange. But the spring orange and the fall oranges can be really, really exciting.
Oh, absolutely. Some of my favorite cultivars aren't even necessarily because of leaf structure or growth structure. It's when it comes to those fall colors and the oranges that they put off. Just and that's what's fun is, with garden design, you want something performing with those oranges. When fall comes, your garden is going to be at full display.
Yeah, it's very playful. It's very energetic. And it gives you just like this warm kind of feeling, the color orange. But then we've got the color black. And when I think of the color black, I think of the color of like those black red Japanese maples. We're talking jet black. We're talking Emperor One. We're talking Crimson Prince. And Bloodgood would fit often in this category after their spring flush. And they just give you a classic, sophisticated look.
And I think strong is the one that you could add to black. It's a strong, bold color.
That is for sure. And it just contrasts so well because there's no true black. There's not a lot of true black colors out in nature. But you can get those black-red colors in Japanese maples that really just add this unique, bold, classic feel in the garden.
And almost geisha gone wild when it leaves out and you got the inner part of the leaves that almost look. I mean, to me, some of them almost look like they are just pure dark black.
Yeah.
And then you get that purple out and on the outside of the leaf. There's not many plants out there that just pop like that.
Talking about geisha gone wild, our next color is the pink.
It's the pink.
It's the pink. So we've got a very playful feel, a very cute kind of feel with those pink plants and pink Japanese maples.
What I like about the pink is with these, especially during the spring with Japanese maples, you get a lot of that spring flush, and you get that pink, and it almost looks like some of these. You almost think like that tree is flowering, that there's buds on it with the pinks that come out, and like, romantic and I like that word playful because it really is, because you normally don't get that color out of a tree.
Yeah. I mean, it's unreal. It makes the plant seem like something out of a fairy tale, because you don't think of that pink color being on a tree in nature. You might think of a pink flower, but a tree that gives you pink color, that is crazy. And there are plenty of Japanese maples that can give you that pink color that seem truly unreal. And it really just, it gives a very unique vibe out there in the garden because there's not much else like it.
It's funny, we're talking about geisha gone wild and that pink. last year, I went to a buddy's house to do a visit, and we took a gift with us, and we took him a Geisha Gone Wild. And talking to him, he says that they put it in their front yard, and they say that neighbors now and people drive by just to look at that tree because they've never seen a tree that puts off those colors before, and it's something that really that playful. It causes people excitement because they're not used to seeing that.
So we've talked a little bit about color psychology. Let's talk about textures. How important are textures in the garden?
So textures are so important because when you have a garden, you want stuff to contrast each other. You want this tree to cause this other tree or other plant to pop. But at the same time, you want that to make that one pop as well. So with the texture, different leaf structures, different size of the leaves is so important that you can lay them out and use them to contrast. So for example, if you take a finer foliage and you place it towards the front, your distance is going to look smaller, whereas vice versa. If you swap that with just the leaf size, you're going to change the depth. You can make something feel smaller. You can make something feel bigger.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing, too, with these textures is don't put all the same texture out there. Don't let your mind get bored in the garden. There are so many fun textures and so many fun textures with Japanese maples specifically that you can use in the garden. And using the textures to create depth is an outstanding way to do it. Using textures out there to really contrast each other, that is the name of the game. And there's three really main textures. There's that fine foliage. We're talking like a lace leaf when it comes to a Japanese maple. We're talking like a Leonard Lobum style. When we're talking about those medium foliages, we're talking like a Katsura or a Ryucin. And then we're talking about that coarse foliage. We're talking like those big Acer shirasawanum, Acer japonicum plants that have the thicker branching, that have the thicker foliage, those large foliage. And there's so much can be done with playing with the textures between those. And then there's so many other fun Japanese maples that have unique textures where the leaves curl upward, where they curl downward. And that's just one of the things that makes the textures on Acer palmatum, Acer japonicum, Acer shirasawanum so exciting.
Absolutely. And then you talk about textures that, there's Japanese maples that like we talked about purple ghost before, but the leaves almost look like they kind of crinkle up and almost look like a claw sometimes, like they want to grab something. And so and then, you got Peve starfish that wants to curl and actually looks like something. You've got these, and you can use those. So when you're looking, you're not just looking at leaf size or leaf style, but how they actually, as it becomes older growth and how it changes, that even creates, you get something that looks dry or something that looks wet or flat. There's so much that you can do to contrast each other with those.
So we talked about color psychology. We talked about textures. What about the habits of Japanese maples?
Absolutely. Habit. And so that's really good you bring up habit, because something that is really, a lot of people, I wouldn't say forget, but don't always give as much attention to, and habit is that, I call it that vertical, is height. So some of these, you got some of these that are dwarfs, so they'll stay small, but then you can get something that's an upright that's going to be bigger. That it really allows. So one thing I like is like Seryu. Seryu is going to get larger. So now you get that height, but now you can use that as a way to create an environment to bring in dwarfs and other stuff and grow them. It's using, one thing I like to do with garden design is using plants that I select in that garden to help create an environment for other plants that you can grow that maybe you wouldn't worked well there before, but now that you have this area creating shade, now I've got an environment that I can use something else to create texture, depth, colors.
And talking about Seryu, you've got a plant that gives you an upright habit, gives you a large tree out there in the landscape, but then has that finer foliage to give you that unique texture. And that's just such a fun thing that you can do in this section of plants. It's pretty outstanding. And there's uniqueness in every plant with over, probably around 1,200 to 1,400 different selections of Japanese maples here at Mr. Maple currently. And there's Japanese maples that weep. And then there's Japanese maples that have a heavily cascading habit, that are more cascading and more pendulous than the other selections. Then we've got trees that are dwarfs, trees that are super dwarfs, true miniatures. We've got trees that have just lateral branches, that branches grow more laterally. We've got trees that grow upright and have, a really nice upright structure. And then you've got Japanese maples that have almost like a pencil-like habit, where they just grow straight upwards with very, small spaces and small, narrow habits that just fit almost anywhere in the garden.
And what's also fun with Japanese maples with all those different varieties is that you can get the same type of look and you can kind of fit it to the space you have. You may not, may like the way bloodgood looks, but you may not have the space to put a bloodgood with its growth habit. So you have that alternative where you can go with like a Rhode Island red, where you can still get those colors, that style, but it'll fit that space of garden that you have. So with Japanese maples, you can get the look and the style you want because there are so many different cultivars that you can get the right one to fit your area as well. So don't think that, well, I like that, but I don't have the space for it, or I really want this. And there's going to be a version that is so close to it, but its growth habits different, that you can apply it to that landscape area.
That is so true. So true. There's a spot for a Japanese maple. If there's a spot in your garden that's empty, there's a spot for a Japanese maple.
Absolutely. There's one out there that will fit that spot.
Exactly, because there's such a huge diversity in color, texture, shape, and size when it comes to Acer palmatum, Acer shirasalinum, Acer japonicum. Those maples are simply amazing, and it's so outstanding. So let's start going down the list.
Let's do it.
Let's start talking about some of these trees, talking about how to use them in the landscape, what kind of mood they create in the landscape, and how to really use them to really accentuate that mood.
Absolutely.
So let's start with one of our favorites. The Maple Mafia's one of their favorite trees is Makawa Yatsubusa.
What I like about Makawa Yatsubusa is that there are so many different applications that you can do with this. Since it is a dwarf and sits smaller, and that tight growth habit that it has, that you can use it in your garden to help create that depth. It stays that. But then also, if you want to incorporate a Makawa, it's so great in a pot as well. So if you want something that, if you do container gardening, or even if you have something where you have your patio and you have trees out there and you want to bring something closer to bring that into the patio, that's a great way. Is container gardening is bringing potted trees and potted plants into the patio. So it feels like the garden is an extension of your patio. You can also, Makawa works so well in a pot as well. So you can bring that up and feel like, hey, I'm sitting in the garden as we look out into it. I'm sitting in the garden.
So I started a poll on our Mr. Maple Friends Facebook group, and I said, we all know that Makawa is one of your favorites. What is the reason you like this tree so much? Feel free to add your own options. And I put dwarf size, layering habit, unique structure, easy to grow. But then other people started beginning to add their own title, their own ideas. And some people said it's easy to grow. It's got good fall color, ability to be grown in a container, all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to train as a bonsai. The leaf density. It's got a spring freshness. It's whimsy. There we're starting to get into moods again.
Mm-hmm.
It's heat tolerance, and it's iconic.
It is.
And it really is iconic. When Alex Ruckelman put that one on there, and I was like, man, that's a really good way to describe Makawa Yatsubusa is iconic, because it is so unique and it is so different in the way it has that tightly layering habit. Like, it just gives you that playful, that fun feeling.
I laugh because Brian Rule, I remember him saying, he's like, you can't be a respectable maple collector if you don't have a Makawa. You have to have one.
Yeah, and it just brings you to that childlike, that feeling when you see it. I know that's one of the things that you were talking to me about beforehand. You're like, it's so childlike, and it really is.
Childlike, it's innocent, and excuse me, it makes me think of, it's almost comic book-like.
It is, and whether you consciously or subconsciously realize it, when you look at a macawa, it kind of reminds you of a Muppet. And it just gives you that positive, that playful, that really lively feel, because again, it's green. It's that tile layering habit just gives it that animal like it's alive appearance. And with those arms as they stick out, it just reminds you of something like a little creature out there. And because of that, it is very playful. And so there's so many ways to use this in the landscape.
And those fall colors are amazing too. You can't forget about those fall colors.
Yeah, I mean, bright oranges, bright reds. Makawi Atsubusa, it was one of the very first maples of the year with the Maple Society. And the reason it is because it is easy to grow and it's outstanding. It's so unique and it's so different.
So with Makawa, it can be used in the landscape in so many different ways. But one of my favorite ways is since it is a dwarf, that it stays low. It really allows you to create depth in your garden. Whereas with it staying low, you can come up with something that sits up a little bit taller behind it, and it really will help that even. So with that tight, if I think of like say a high graft Tamukiyama with that lace leaf behind it, but then you got that Makawa in front of it with that tight green leaves and that structure, helps create that depth and really helps create a pop.
That is for sure. We did that at Maplewood Gardens. We sort of use it as a focal point. So as soon as you walk into the garden, one of the first things you see as you walk through the arbor is a Makawi Atsubusa. And it is much shorter than the Japanese maples behind it. And behind that, there's taller Japanese maples. And behind that, there's even more taller Japanese maples. And it creates a really good depth perception. But at the same time, Makawi Atsubusa has become a focal point. And it's so unique for that. And it's often, if you see a photo that we share of Maplewood Gardens, it's from that vantage point. Because you see the plant, it adds that depth perception. But at the same time, it gives you that fun, lively feel in the garden. And so your first experience walking into the garden is an interaction and a meet and greet with Makawi Atsubusa.
That's fun. That's fun. It's a great one to walk into. You know, you walk into a garden, that's the first thing you see that meets your eyes, because what it's going to do is with that, you're going to look at that and you're going to go, whoa, but then you're going to keep going and see everything else behind it. But you always come right back to that.
And that's one of the things about Makawa that just makes it so fun, because it can be used in so many places. Being a dwarf, it's great for containers. So you can put that lively, energetic, fun-like feature, out by your pool in a patio planter, in a container. You can move that around on your deck. And so it adds a lot to the garden and what it can do out in the landscaping garden.
And I know bonsaists like to use Makawa Atsubusa, but what's also fun with it in the garden is that you can get that bonsai look without actually having to bonsai. It almost kind of looks like it's already been bonsai'd for you.
It really does. And that's its unique structure that's iconic, that is just so outstanding. And definitely an amazing Japanese maple anybody should have in their garden. If you're a Japanese maple lover and you don't have Makawi Atsubusa, you need to get it because it's pretty awesome.
Like Brian Rule said, if you want to be a respected collector, you have to have a Makawa.
All right, guys. So we're getting into our next tree we're going to be talking about. And this is one of my favorite red uprights. This is Acer palmatum Fireglow. And this is a unique Japanese maple for a red upright. And the reason I love this plant is because this tree grows upright and has a dark maroon foliage on top. But in sunlight, when it gets morning sun or afternoon shade, it has a glowing-like effect because it gets orange to the backside of the foliage. This creates this glow-like effect where it gets the name Fireglow.
And when we were talking about that color psychology, Fireglow, that is such a bold, strong tree. That color, you talking about the way it glows, it's almost regal in a sense with the way it pushes.
It does. It gives you an exciting color. And it gives you that feel of being in a forest, especially looking up into it as it has that glowing-like effect. I mean, we all have been into a forest somewhere and looking up into the trees and seeing the sunlight come through the leaves. But when you see that with that bright orange coming through, like that orange-red backside of the foliage getting hit with light from the sun, it really is outstanding. So when I use this tree in the landscape, it's something that I always try to take and put somewhere where you have that excitement, where you have morning sun or afternoon sun hitting this tree so you can really enjoy that glowing effect that fire glow gets its name for.
And with the gardening aspect with fire glow, this is another one of those for the right condition. You might want that look, but not have the right condition because you get sun all day. And fire glow is one of those that is very heat tolerant. So in the landscape aspect, that's one of those, if, hey, I'm looking for a tree with those colors, that growth habit, but I need it to be able to sustain that sun, that's a great one for application.
It really is. And there's so many red uprights, but fire glow is just one that is so outstanding in so many ways, being that mid-sized upright Japanese maple fits in so many people's garden. And as an upright tree with that red color, especially with that glowing effect, it adds another dimension in the landscape.
And it also pairs really well with other reds and other leaf styles in the garden. It pairs well with others. You got some that maybe this and this go better, but fire glow, you can almost pair that with any other tree in the garden.
Now, for a red upright, a mature specimen of fire glow is going to have one of the best fall colors. When you have a mature tree out in the landscape and garden, it has fall colors that can often be confused with Osakazuki. And we've got some good photos on MrMaple.com that we show some of those fall colors. A friend of ours in Canada actually posted some of these photos, and we're like, hey, can we use those photos? Because that really shows what fire glow does very well. And it is just outstanding. He has Osakazuki and fire glow in the same planting, and it's hard to distinguish them because they're both mature specimens. And so for a red upright, fire glow has one of the best fall colors, just a bright, bright, fiery red, which is just exciting. It just gives you that passionate, that exciting, that love feel that is contrasts so well with everything else out there in the landscape. And so when you have that bright, bold colors, you can actually put them in a line around the edge of your property to just give an exciting feel. I know the gentleman that we use his photo, he actually has a gazebo in the center and has a line of fire glows around the backside of, right along the fence, right outside his gazebo. And it's just because it's such a relaxing feel to just sit out there and enjoy this classic Japanese maple that is just rocks it out all throughout the season. And fire glow is one of those plants, when people are looking for a red upright Japanese maple, fire glow is one of the best ones to choose.
Absolutely. It's such a hardy tree as well that when you put it in your landscape, you know that it's going to grow well.
So next we're on to Waterfall.
Waterfall. I mean, that's a classic in itself. What I like about Waterfall is that you've got that classic green lace leaf, but in the garden, that's another one of those. It works so well with layering. It's one of those that if you got a smaller space, you get a low graph, it's going to stay that way. You can put it in spaces that you would maybe use some type of shrub. You can almost use a waterfall in place of a shrub in spots that will give you that different look. And waterfall, I mean, like, I know it was found next to a waterfall, but looking at it, if you didn't know that story, you would say, well, it's called a waterfall because it looks, the growth structure looks like it's a waterfall.
It does. And waterfalls have that calming, relaxing habit. And so does waterfall itself. And it does that with the green color, which is that, that stable, that fresh, that calm feeling. And so you have this very calm tree out there in the landscape. Now, people often will have a, red or dark colored house, and they're often thinking, hey, I want to go and put a red Japanese maple there, which sometimes gets lost. But by putting a green there, you add color contrast, but you also add that fresh, calm feeling right there by your door, right there by your house. And there's so much of that relaxing side of things that people don't even realize about plants and gardening that is so beneficial. The Journal of Environmental Health, Environmental Horticulture, did this study where they went and put plants in a computer room and they had a control where there was plants in the computer room. And then they also had an area where there was no plants in the computer room. And they found that the plants in there increased worker productivity, reduced stress, and increase reaction time. And that's just crazy. So bring these plants, put them next to your house. Japanese maples have non-invasive root systems, and that green, calming feeling is going to add a lot to your garden.
And with Waterfall also is, again, you can't forget its fall colors. Its fall colors, those oranges and those yellows that it goes through during the fall, you're going to get a performer in your landscape during that fall season. Just like most of these, you're going to get something out of it, but that Waterfall in your landscape with those contrasting colors, like you say, if you have a red brick or something in the background, that green is going to give you something where it pops out and gives you some depth against your house.
Now, Waterfall has that weeping arching habit where the branches go horizontally and then cascade downward at the ends. And J.D. Veritree says a real fun, interesting thing about these weeping style of Japanese maples. He says plant them on hills because it will accentuate their structure. Because you can really look into the structure too. And it's a fun way to really be able to enjoy a lace leaf is by growing them on a hill. At Hillstone Arboretum, our uncle's home and gardens, we took this to the next level. We took Waterfall and we planted it on top of the rock wall. And that makes this tree so fun because you can actually look up into the structure of the tree as it develops. So you can enjoy those weeping habits. You can enjoy those bonsai-like structures that Waterfall can develop. And that's how I really enjoy this. So if you're getting a Waterfall, think about planting it up with some height if you can. It's a unique way to enjoy Waterfall. You know, it's a great tree for containers. It's a great tree to look down on with its weeping habit as well. But by planting it on a hill or giving it some height where you can actually look up at the structure, you're going to enjoy Waterfall so much more.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what we got here? We got next plant, Ryucin.
Guys, this is a selection from Kobayashi Momiji in Japan. It has, when it comes to foliage, it has that medium foliage. It's got that mid foliage, so that texture is that medium foliage. But this tree has that extreme weeping habit. So we talked about Waterfall that's green, that has that finer foliage. And Ryucin has an extremely weeping habit, but a different texture because of that bigger foliage.
I would say also that weeping habit is a word that comes to my mind is wild. It has that wild. It's. You go out into some of the greenhouses and you start looking at these Ryucin, and you've got stuff going this way and then turning this way and then going back this way. And you talk about texture in the garden. You got stuff that just looks wild and going like that, but is still contained in itself. A great way to add a look in that garden, because you don't want everything performing and looking the same. You want when you walk into your garden, you want to look at one thing and it take you to the next thing, and then that takes you to the next thing to get the whole thing. And Ryucin gives you that. If you stick that somewhere and you got all that crazy growth habit going on, it's really going to pull your eyes to it.
It's amazing that we've got a plant with Waterfall and a plant with Ryucin. They can be the same color. They can both be weeping styles, but they have contrasting textures, and their weeping styles are remarkably different. You've got Waterfall that has that spreading out arching habit, and then you've got Ryucin that has this straight down, strict weeping habit, which is so fun to play with. I mean, I often like to take this plant, stake it up to 6-7 feet, and let it just flow downward like a fountain. And when you do that, again, you've got that relaxing feel out there in the garden because of that medium foliage, that medium texture. It gives you a multi-dimensional feel compared to many of the other textures of weeping Japanese maples. And the fall color can really give you some bold shades of oranges to red, which is so starkly different. But this is a heat-tolerant tree. This is an easy tree to grow as well. And when we were in Japan, we saw so many fun ways that Ryucin was being grown. We saw it being grown in hanging baskets. We saw it being grown as topsy-turvies, growing underneath the pot, coming out of the bottom of the pot, and then allowed to grow straight downward. And then eventually they would flip it back over, and it would almost be like every branch was naturally staked. I mean, so many fun things you can do with Ryucin. I saw it being grown over arbors and trained over arbors. it has such a vigorous habit, and its strict weeping habit is very predictable and easy to train. It is just such an easy and fun Japanese maple to use in the landscaping garden.
Absolutely, absolutely. I also think that, a lot of people, if they're not into Japanese maples or don't know a lot about them, and they say, "Oh, I want a Japanese maple in my garden," I think a response with Ryucin and other ones like Ryucin is, though, I think a lot of people just assume that most weepers are lace leaf. And then when you come across this and you see it's a weeper and it's not a lace leaf, I think for some people it kind of fools the brain for a minute.
It really does. And one other fun way I saw this being grown was at Oroki Gardens in New York. And this is a garden that's owned by Michael Steinhardt. And he used this as a ground cover. He took a low graft and then he allowed it to be grown as a ground cover. People often use junipers as ground covers. I never thought about using a Japanese maple because it's so heavily cascading that it'll just creep and crawl across the ground if it's not staked. And it's such a fun way to do that. I mean, growing a Japanese maple as a ground cover, you've got a ground cover that has amazing fall color. You've got a vigorous ground cover that's just going to make this amazing little plant out there in the garden. And it gives you a very unique texture as a ground cover.
Man, can you just imagine the fall with as the ground cover, like the garden floor just pop? I mean, I'm just trying to picture that in my brain. And it's wild.
So we have introduced some Ryucin-like seedlings with Looking Glass Falls, Fountain of Youth, and Dragon Master. They're Ryucin style with that heavily cascading habit. Think about using those colors and textures, all trained in different shapes. That fountain-like form, that ground cover, hanging baskets, topsy-turvies. Put it over a trellis with just those styles of Japanese maples. You could make some fun, exciting gardens just doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, even if that was the only way you used Japanese maples in your garden, it's such a unique and awesome way to
Dragon Master being an orange, Looking Glass Falls with the purple border.
Yeah.
Fountain of Youth with a slightly different texture on the foliage itself, a little more divided. I mean, just that alone. So really, really cool. And that's just such a fun one to play with.
Absolutely.
And then we go from Ryucin to Orangeola.
Oh, that's a great one. And, we have these open houses and customers come up and they say, "Tell me more about Orangeola." And I always have to say, well, Matt and Tim say it's the Baskin Robbins of trees. It's 31 flavors, because it truly is. You look at that, and at different times, you're going to go through those oranges, and you're going to get those greens. I mean, it's almost a hodgepodge of all these different colors that we talked about. You're going to get those throughout the entire season.
Yeah, you really get the reds, the orange reds. The orange reds keep coming across it with maturing to maroon reds, to brighter reds, to greens, and it keeps having that new growth flush all over top of it. It just constantly changes. And that's one of the things that we love about Japanese maples, that ever-changing beauty. And with that ever-changing new growth color on Orangeola, it really gives unique colors, unique perspective, and an ever-changing color out there in the garden.
And the growth habit on these, they're just as fun. We're talking about the Ryucin and the Waterfall and the Weeping and these Orangeolas. Again, so all these three that we just mentioned, they can be paired together. You get in different colors going on, but they could all be paired together really, really well in the garden.
They could. And Orangeola has a very strict weeping habit too. It's not quite as strong as Ryucin, but it's pretty close. I mean, for a weeping style of a more considered a red Japanese maple, I consider it a red because it has red new growth to it. This tree is heavily, heavily cascading. So it's another fun one to put in a hanging basket. I mean, I like those strict heavy weepers to put in hanging baskets, but it's also a fun one to grow in a container. And the fun thing about these strict weepers in containers is you can put them in a container and they will grow down below the pot. And it just creates a fun dynamic for a containered dwarf Japanese maple.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you say container, another one of those that you can pot up and bring it closer to your patio or where in your garden where you can help make your entire area part of the garden, not just a flower bed.
I think Orangeola has quickly become one of our most popular red Japanese maples. It used to be Crimson Queen, but Orangeola, people, once they've realized that name, it's that name that they can say, it is really fun and exciting. And that is that red color. I mean, that orange red color gives you that playful, energetic, that exciting, that passionate kind of color, that mood it sets out there. And then to constantly be changing, it gives you an anticipation in the garden of, hey, what's that Orangeola looking like today?
Absolutely. And it's one of those where it seems to be a much quicker changer than any of the other ones because, some of these you've got your moments during the season. This one seems like the entire season is its moment.
It is. And it just keeps going on and on. Again, this is another maple that has won one of the maples of the year with the North American branch of the Maple Society. And so it's a maple award winner. And there aren't many of those right now. We started the process, I believe, in 2014 or 2015 of Maple of the Year program. And Orangeola, it's one that I love, and it's really deserving of its awards.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't disagree anymore. Or agree anymore. What was that?
So next up, we've got one of my personal favorites, Acer palmatum Summer Gold.
Oh, man, you should see the ones we got sitting outside. The big ones that just came in, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
absolutely gorgeous.
Some good specimens in bald and burlap we've got. But that yellow,
yep.
It gives you that happy, cheerful feel, that optimistic, that hopeful, that joyful kind of feel out there in the landscape. But this yellow can be used in so many different ways.
And this yellow, it's almost kind of a different yellow. I almost want to say that to call it to say that summer gold. I mean, you got it in the gold, but it really is almost saying yellow is almost kind of like a letdown because that gold, it really is. It's not just yellow, but it's that gold color that really pops.
My favorite time is in the springtime when it's first leafing out. It's got a little bit of a red border around the edge. The seeds during the fall, the late summer, early fall, turn to a bright red, and they're often standing up above the yellow foliage. Gives such good color contrast. This tree, I love it because it's a tree that can handle more sun. It's one of the most sun tolerant of your Acer palmatums. And, you may show a little burn on a young plant, but once it's established, it typically handles that sun better than any of the other yellows, except for maybe hot blonde, which we've introduced here at Mr. Maple. But summer gold is that mid-sized, 6 to 8 foot in 10 years, upright Japanese maple, selection by Ghirardelli Nursery in Italy. And they introduced some amazing plants like that fire glow we mentioned earlier. And it is just so outstanding with that yellow color. I mean, I did a whole video on how to use yellow in your garden, the color contrast that it provides, just to show people summer gold in the sun, but also to show it how it can brighten up those dark spaces in the shade as well. As a upright tree with that medium to coarse texture, that sort of in between, it really gives a unique texture, form, and color that's just going to grab people's attention.
And again, a really good pairing with something that was with green in the garden. Another great pairing, and it being that upright, I like that one. It's one of those, like you talked about, a waterfall being up. That's that with it being that upright. I like being able to look at that and have that some height on that, and because with that yellow, then you can with some of the other colors kind of build around that.
Yeah, that is so true, and that's what we did. Also, is at Maplewood Gardens, we tried to put a summer gold, midway down in the garden to give a little bit of depth perception behind that Macaulay Etsubusa to grab people's attention. But if you put the yellows up close, the focal point often becomes the yellow because it's so bright. It commands so much attention. It's so happy and cheerful, and it's going to make your garden feel a little smaller. So you often take these yellows and put them in the background where they can contrast against other trees, or put them in that focused area in your garden from your major vantage points, because that's going to really draw your eye out and experience the full garden. And the taller your summer gold gets, the more vertical interest it adds in the garden And the more that bright yellow color brings your eye up higher in the landscape to really experience the depth of your garden. So next up, guys, we've got Ukigumo. This is one of our first white Japanese maples.
I say, yeah. So this one is fun with that white, but you also I know this is a very seasonal tree that you're not going to get that white every year, and if you do get that white, it may not be the same white. It might be speckles of it. So what's fun about this in landscape is that the performance of it is going to keep your garden changing, where one year it's going to perform one way and the next year it might perform differently. So you don't have just the same thing year in, year out.
That's for sure. And Ukigumo, to get the best whites, we've got a whole video on how to do that. But the main tips are to leaf this tree out slowly. Give it some protection from the hot afternoon sun. Don't over-fertilize it. And let this plant just try to leaf out at a reasonable pace. And when you do that, you get more consistent white each and every year. And when it's not a Japanese maple that is displaying the white color, it is a green Japanese maple, which gives you that calm, fresh feeling. But then also can give you some really good fall colors of yellows with mostly oranges. And so in that fall, it can give you that energetic, that warm feeling. And so it is a Japanese maple that is really unique and really different, but is very changeful as well. And so you have to remember that the floating clouds maple, which is often called, is one of those plants that may not give you that white each and every year, but it still gives you amazing dynamics in the gardens, even when it doesn't display those white color.
And that's what's I think is fun about that, is that since it does change from year to season to season, year to year, that its growth habit might change a little bit or color wise. To me, that's exciting in a garden, because if you just expect the same thing in, year out, over time that garden can start to feel a little stale sometimes, and then you start thinking, oh, maybe I want to move that, or I want to put something else in that place. With this, since you kind of get that, you got something it's going to perform differently, so you don't have to think so much about, well, maybe I should put something else there, because you can get that one year, and then the next year you got something else that just allows, to me, it's almost like the garden's breathing, it's growing, it's moving, doing different things.
So we've got a Ukigumo, but if you're looking for something with a little bit more coarse texture, you're looking for something that has more of that consistent white color. We go from Ukigumo to Uzumo.
Right. So Uzumo, batwing maple, now you're starting to get into that with the big leaves, and you start talking about texture. Now you're getting in that area where you can really, where we talked about that depth, where and it's a larger tree, so you're really getting into where you can play with that size to really expand on. So you can, with that, you can take a smaller space and make it feel a whole lot bigger by adding that big leaf into it.
And that is so true. And you can make that space feel even larger by taking that coarse foliage planting off in the distance too, and really adding that color contrast with that white out there in the landscape. Because white, there's not a lot of white trees out there. And with Uzumo, we're talking about a plant that is very consistently white each and every spring. And it'll green up a little bit during the summer, and then gives you some sort of yellows to oranges in the fall. That is such a coarse plant when it comes to the foliage. It's got those large batwing leaves. It's got a little bit thicker branching structure than your typical Acer palmatum, because it is an Acer pictum, but it's also very heat tolerant. It's going to be a white that you can add a very large, elegant feel out there in the garden with that coarser foliage.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so next up, we've got another fan favorite. We've got Acer palmatum dissectum, Red Dragon.
Oh, I love Red Dragon. Red Dragon is one of these. Again, it's when we talk about Makawa, I think there's a lot of qualities with Red Dragon that you can put in with the Makawa. The fact that it's easy to pot. I've got one low graph in a pot, and to me, if you stand back and look at it, it looks like it could be a tree that's 80 years old from the growth habit. in the aspect like with the Makawa. So with the red dragon, it being a dwarf, with that red, and I almost think that that red on the red dragon is it's almost its own red. That it has its own red with that lace leaf, with a smaller plant that looks so mature, contrasting in the garden. I mean, it's just one of my favorites.
And you're right about it having its own shade of red when it comes to red weeping lace leaves. It has a unique style that it actually gets orange to the backside of the foliage like the fire glow does. So when the wind blows, it looks brighter than all of the other red weeping Japanese maples. It holds its color exceptionally well. And that habit you're talking about, it is weeping, but it is slightly weeping. So it gives you this arching bonsai-like structure that is really easy to train into shape if you're wanting to train and shape into bonsai. But it does a structure like that naturally. And with that slightly weeping habit, it is very graceful. It is very sophisticated and classic, but it also is just so elegant in the way that it does it, that it gives a very awesome vibe out there in the garden. And with a name like Red Dragon, it just screams, put me in your Japanese garden and enjoy this plant.
Yeah, it's one of those, again, like, you know, if you're collecting these or you want these, like, that's another one of those that, like, yeah, you kind of have to have this. This is a tree that you kind of have to have in your collection because, like I say, how many of those small ones that you look at look that mature at that size?
And it is a slower growing red lace leaf, so it fits in a lot of spaces. When it comes to Tamukiyama, it's much faster. When it comes to Nabashidari, it's a much faster grower. So is Garnet. Crimson Queen, it gets much wider at the same age. But Red Dragon is one of the slower growing red lace leaves. So it fits in smaller spaces. But this is one I do want to give it sunlight. If you put this tree in the shade, it doesn't hold its colors as well as something like Crimson Queen. But in the sunlight, Red Dragon tends to hold its colors extremely well throughout the season.
And heat tolerant.
It is. It really is. So it's a great container plant. One of our good friends that so many of y'all may have saw some of our videos on our YouTube channel, the Mr. Maple Show, where we go film at Dr. John Criticos' garden. And he was coming originally to the nursery to buy 2 red dragons to flank the outside of his house in big blue pots. And then he ended up getting all of the other Japanese maples and conifers that you see in his garden because those red dragons sparked that love and excitement for Japanese maples. And that's what Red Dragon is. It's a gateway drug.
Absolutely. And that with that red, that's another. So we talked before about if you have red background brick or something around your house or something like that, and using that green. Well, this is the opposite. You can put this in front of. You can get that green Japanese maple in the back or something green in the back with this red in front of that. You kind of flip that on that where you got that red in the front with some green in the back. Absolutely awesome.
And these colors are just outrageous when you play them against each other. I mean, how many other plants have such a diversity in one species? I mean, it is outstanding. So next up, we're going to come up with another one of my favorites, Geisha Wild. We've already talked about this a little bit, but that pink is just unreal. And this is one of the most pink Japanese maples that holds that pink color for the longest period of time.
And Geisha Gone Wild, this is a showstopper. This is actually one of those that when trying to design or add something to your garden, this is one of those trees that can be like, this is the focal point of the garden. This is really one where if you got that blank canvas, you're that artist and you got that blank canvas, you can start with that Geisha Gone Wild and build around that because it is so unique with those colors, with that pink and then that variegation and even just the growth structure, the way the leaves grow. You can build a whole garden around, I believe, Geisha Gone Wild.
You really could. Geisha Gone Wild was found by Talon Buchholz as a chance sport on the cultivar Geisha. Shiraz was also found as a chance sport off of Geisha. They're very similar in their habits and their color. And the best thing about Geisha Gone Wild and Shiraz is that they are more of an upright tree. They're hardier, a faster grower, and make a better specimen in the landscape than Geisha does.
And you got pink.
It does. And you get that pink from Geisha, and it went wild. And that's where it got the name Geisha Gone Wild. And this plant is just outstanding. You get that red, that deep, deep, dark, black red color in the center of the foliage with that pink that is just outrageous. It really seems out of this world. It seems like something that would be like on one of these Dr. Seuss type videos where they're talking about all these, trees with the Snorlax and all this stuff. It gives you that unreal pink color that is just outrageous. And that outrageous color is so fun and cute. It's a plant I love, but it's one of my wife's favorite plants because it gives that pink color more than any of the other Japanese maples.
And I could see it. I like I said, my buddy that we brought one to, he tells me that people drive by just to look at that because it's so really you can design a whole garden around this. I believe.
I make sure to give Geisha Gone Wild plenty of sunlight. When you do that, you really brighten up those pink colors, and you can get some outrageous pink colors in there. One of my favorite times of the season, though, for a photographer's standpoint, is that late summer. And late summer, you get more green on the interior part of the leaf with pink around the edge and cream coming into the foliage. And that is just a very fun time to go out there and photograph this plant. But in the fall, you get a pink red in the fall. So if you're looking for something out there that's going to give you that fun, that creative, that feel in the garden like you're in a storybook setting, you're in something in another world, you're in that fairy tale, use a Geisha Gone Wild. This is something that can be added out there in the garden to add that really playful, fun feel in a unique way for a tree. Because you get pink flowers, but you don't really get that many pink trees. And this pink tree, if you give it sunlight, can do that for a long period of time.
Absolutely. So now we go from pink to purple with Purple Ghost.
Now, guys, don't believe everything you see on the internet. You can see some Purple Ghost photos that are photoshopped, that are just turned to a bright shade of lavender in a bonsai pot. Those are fake photos. Those are just green trees that have been turned using Photoshop to a purple. But Purple Ghost does give you some unreal colors of lavender to fuchsia purple, lavender purple to fuchsia purple. And we've got plenty of photos on MrMaple.com that show you the true purple colors, and they are still unreal. And they're unlike anything else when it comes to an upright tree.
And with Purple Ghost, I think a lot of people give attention to just the colors on Purple Ghost because they're amazing. And you got that reticulated, variegated leaf. You got those colors, but the growth habit on those leaves, the way they kind of almost look like to me, they almost kind of look like big old paws or with claws, and they kind of get crispy looking, and the points on the leaves. I think that's just as magical with this tree as the colors that it gives out.
It is, and that reticulated variegation where you see the veins being a dark purple and the rest of the leaf being a lighter shade of lavender purple to fuchsia purple, just add to the mysterious feel that Purple Ghost can give out there in the garden. And being such a dark Japanese maple, this is one that you typically want to plant in settings where you have either a green background, a yellow background, a white background. A light color background is really important. If you plant this tree in the shade where you're not giving it any sunlight, then what's going to end up happening is it's going to get more lost because it's a darker colored tree. Color contrast is the name of the game for me. And if you have to put it in those darker places, plant something near it like a summer gold or a hot blonde that will give good color contrast with it. I mean, you can also plant Ukigumos and these other plants near it to really add to the specialty of that purple color. And it is such a unique shade that is outstanding. I mean, that dark color with that reticulated variegation, it's amazing. It wasn't originally titled Ghost. It was titled for the block that it was at and the year that it was found at Buchholz Nursery by Talon Buchholz. And after he introduced first Ghost, he ended up realizing he had a Ghost series, and Purple Ghost, being it also had that reticulated variegation, became Purple Ghost. And he was telling us the story when we were out there visiting in Oregon recently. And it's just outstanding because the purple ghost adds so much to this tree. That mysterious feel, that royal, majestic kind of feel of nobility. It's extremely glamorous. But this is a tree that can just be used so much in the landscape because the color alone, but the fact that it's so large and makes, a 10 to 12 foot tree in 10 years adds a lot in the garden.
And with that purple ghost, it almost, that purple almost demands respect, if that makes sense. It almost, it's its own kind of like we talk about some of these, like it has its own kind of color. This purple is its own kind of purple, and it's that majestic, that royal, that noble. Those are great words to describe that purple. Noble. It almost demands that respect.
It really does. And so when you're using purple ghost, remember to color contrast is the name of the game. If you plant it along a bunch of other dark red Japanese maples, that purple's not going to have as much contrast as it will if you plant it around plants that where you can really play off that deep purple color. I mean, lighter colored plants are going to be the name of the game for color contrast near this tree. And this is a tree that off in the distance can give you some outrageous colors, but also up close near a walking path, you can really enjoy the intricacies of that reticulated style ghost-like variegation in the foliage itself.
Absolutely. So then we move on to, and this is a really fun one, Twombly's Red Sentinel.
Guys, this was found as a witch's broom by Ken Twombly of Connecticut. And he was like, I grafted it. And one day I was just, walking out there and said, hey, this looks like a sentinel because it just grows so tall and narrow. So it became Twombly's Red Sentinel. But it does have a more brighter picked up red. I mean, I often wondered if it wasn't a broom on fire glow because of how brightly colored the foliage is on Twombly's Red Sentinel.
And it's funny you say that with the fire glow, because whenever I see Twombly's Red Sentinel, I always immediately think like this would pair so well with fire glow in the garden because you can get those similar colors, but the growth habit is so different that you can create that texture. You can keep those colors if you're going with that color scheme. You can keep those colors, but you can get that texture difference just from the growth habit difference.
Now, Twombly's Red Sentinel for us in Western North Carolina can end up getting about 8 to 10 feet tall in 10 years by only 2 foot wide, 2.5 foot wide. So it stays narrow and gives you a really nice vertical interest. Now, vertical interest in the garden is really important. It allows you to see the full depth of the garden. It allows you to look all the way down and see the full garden rather than just looking at what's in what's close up. It allows you to check out that background and really just enjoy that entire garden. And with that brighter red color, it will draw more attention out there with that vertical interest.
And I almost think can you use a Twombly's with its growth habit almost like you would like an arborvitae in a garden with as narrow as it stays? Like you can actually, I think you probably group them closer together.
You definitely can.
I think that would look really.
I've
really
seen
cool.
people use Twombly's Red Sentinel as a hedge. I've seen people use it as a hedge along the outside to block, something visually, but still have a Japanese maple there with red color and bright red fall color. So it can be used in so many unique ways because of that vertical habit. Often I've seen people use something like a Twombly's Red Sentinel at the entrances of gardens. And in a more English formal style garden, they'll often use two, one on each side of the garden. And it'll sort of be like the gate, the entranceway, the welcoming party, the regal entrance that grabs your attention and feels like you're walking into, a fort or a castle. And that is a fun way to use Twombly's. But you can use these in a mass grouping. You can use these singularly just to add that vertical interest, to give you contrast in texture because it's so tightly compact, to give you contrast in the color because of its red color, or just simply because of that vertical shape, which just adds so much to the garden. That verticality, it's one of the most important features of a garden that people often miss.
A lot of people miss that because you're looking for, and what I really like about this list is we're talking all about foliage. We're not talking about flower blooms. We're just talking about foliage and all the different things, the different colors, all the things you're doing. That Twombly's Red Sentinel, that color, that red. So you talk about that regal, but with that red again. If you're walking into the garden and you see it, and that's your entrance, you're immediately with that red. You're talking about that excitement and passion, and so it kind of brings that. I'm coming into this garden, and the passion is just starting. That there's so much more in there.
So, guys, next up, we've got a fun plant that is very different, a classic Japanese maple. We're talking about Shishigashira, the lion's head Japanese maple.
This is the one that started it all for me. The first time I saw Shishigashira, it was one of those where I got to take a closer look at this. This isn't a Japanese maple. Like, this is a Japanese maple. That tight growing form on it. To me, there's nothing like it. And then you get into the fact that this plant, for me personally, has been the easiest plant for me to grow. It doesn't matter if I put it in shade, if I put it in sun, doesn't matter. I mean, they matter, but it's been the easiest one to grow. It's the one that started everything for me, that green. And then I tell you what, those fall colors, when those leaves go to that orange, and it almost, so mine this past fall went to that orange, and then the outside of the leaf had this red barrier on it, and it almost made the leaves look like it was a variegated leaf on this plant.
Oh, man. Now, you talked about the dark green color of Shishigashira and how much that attracts you. But the texture where the leaves curl upward, that texture, along with that fall color of those yellows to oranges you're talking about, is why this tree gets its name of the lion's head or lion's mane, because it appears to have like that lion's mane that was just that bright color. Now, Shishi is a mythological lion in Japanese literature, and that's where it gets its name. It could be kind of like saying Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse. Because it's a female lion, it'd be Minnie Mouse. But it's a very popular tree in ancient Japanese literature, a very popular creature. Now, Shishigashira, like you talked about, is extremely hardy. I had a cousin who grew this in full sun and clay in Columbia, South Carolina, where the heat index is crazy high. And she didn't take much care of it, and it thrived and did well, like you talked about. It's super easy to grow, but it's also a really popular one for bonsai because it's habit. Now, the thing that is really unique is it has thicker branching, and it has thicker foliage, and it has that coarse texture because of the way those leaves curl. It is so uniquely different, and the color is a darker green than most of the other Japanese maples. So the color contrast gives you this very forest-like appearance, but with a very unique texture and something that just grabs your attention because your mind isn't bored. Your mind says, what in the world is that with that curled foliage?
Absolutely. And that color of the green, so like when it leaves out, it's kind of got that lighter green, but once it kind of ages and it pulls, it's that deep forest green. So then we're pairing with other greens and other colors, it's almost a dark green that it gives you more than, it helps with that contrast where if you did those reds, but throw in those yellows and greens against that, because
Exactly.
it is so dark, it'll make those other greens feel like, are they green?
That was my point exactly. I mean, you don't even have to go away from the color green. In fact, it helps see the other shades of green when you pair this in there with some of your other green Japanese maples. Now, it's going to be the thing that steals the show. It's going to be the thing that grabs the focal point often. But this is a tree that grabs your attention and you say, hey, I need that in my garden. But it's an excellent container plant. I see a lot of people grow this in a container because how hardy it is, but it can handle the sun. It can handle the shade. Now, one thing I have noted is that a tree that's in the sunlight with Shishigashira is going to be shorter and denser, and it's going to be wider. But often the trees grown in the shade with Shishigashira are narrower, and they grow taller. They stretch out a little bit more in the shade. So it's something to keep in mind. What type of shape do you want to have on your Shishigashira, and whether or not you're putting it in the sun or the shade. But it's an awesome tree that can be used almost anywhere in the landscape and garden. And because of that dark green color, it can be paired with almost any other Japanese maple.
Absolutely.
So next up, we've got Acer palmatum Golden Falls.
Golden Falls. So this one, that yellow, and then also that weeping habit. again, we're getting into that weeping habit with it, and Golden Falls, it almost when it weeps, like it wants to go
Straight down.
straight down.
It does.
Straight down. It's a really, really fun one.
And so we've got a plant like we talked about with Ryucin that you can do in so many fun ways, from containers, hanging baskets, topsy-turvies. You can train this as ground cover. You can put this tree over a trellis, train it over a trellis. But we just changed the game. We have a yellow color. So you add that happy, cheerful, optimistic color with that same style habit. So you get that calm, relaxing feel with all that color. You know I love yellow, so this one's a pretty good favorite of mine.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I say, it's like with that, again, I can't reiterate it enough, but that the way that it weeps and goes straight down, like you say, hanging basket or anything, if you put it up, the way it weeps, it's just an attention grabber. So if you had this in the landscape, it's going to be another one of those, besides just the color you can pair it with, just the growth habit alone is can become a focal point in your garden.
And we talked a lot about Ryucin, and this adds that yellow color to it. So you can use it in all those same ways, but keep in mind that yellow is going to grab more attention. And so if you put it up close, it's going to make your garden feel smaller. If you put it more in the distance, it's going to be one of those things that makes your garden feel larger. So keep that in mind. Maybe do your Ryucin trellis in the front, your Golden Falls trellis towards the back, and then your eye is extended all the way across your garden. So just keep that in mind whenever you're talking about those yellow colors. But they add so much in contrast, but they grab your attention when it comes to depth. And that's just a key thing to remember whenever it comes to using that yellow color.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. So we just went for Golden Falls. Next up, we've got Moonrise.
Oh, Moonrise. So how do you even categorize Moonrise? Moonrise, like you've got we talk about colors. I mean, I think really you can say is you talk about growth habit and the size of the leaf. But when it comes to colors, how do you categorize Moonrise? All the colors that it goes.
So the texture I know is going to be coarse. It's got that larger foliage.
You got the texture.
You got the coarse texture. But the foliage, it's lime green. It's almost yellow. It gives you a happy, cheerful feel, but it's also kind of fresh. And it's also kind of natural. But what is unnatural is that amazing pink-red color to purple-red color to orange-red color that it gets as new growth flushes over top of that lime green.
And that's why I say, how do you categorize this color? Because it's that new growth is so so this one, I mean, you can almost say, so you've got sophistication, but you got excitement. You got all this. I think Moonrise encapsulates all the emotions into one tree.
The interesting thing here is I always argue that Orangeola is a red lace leaf, but I've never once tried to argue that Moonrise is a red Shirasawanum. And I'm just seeing the hypocrisy in my own argument right there. But Moonrise, just with that large foliage, that large Shirasawanum foliage, continually putting that new growth on there, it gives you color contrast on its own self, let alone everything else around it, because there's nothing else in the garden that's going to be that color of the new growth or the color of the old growth, that lime green to yellow green on the older growth. There's not going to be anything else out there. Being a coarse textured plant, this is something that you typically want to put in the midground to the background, because if you bring it up close, it's going to make your garden feel much smaller. Putting it in that midground to the background, it's going to give your depth perception of your garden and make it feel a little bit larger.
And I like how you say that, put that further back. With the Moonrise, it is such an entertainer. It is such a performer. You don't necessarily want to put that so close, not just for depth reasons, but you don't want it to take attention away from other performers in the garden immediately, because it is such a performer. It is constantly doing something different. You want to give your other trees and your other plants an opportunity to do their thing.
Now, people often ask me, how is Autumn Moon different from Moonrise? And they're very different plants. Moonrise itself is more vigorous. It can also handle a lot more sunlight. And the colors for us are typically brighter on Moonrise. And part of that is because Moonrise itself can actually handle more sunlight. So we can grow it in full sun here in Western North Carolina. Once it's established, it shows no burn on it. And this tree performs exceptionally well. We've got a large specimen at Maplewood Gardens in East Flat Rock, North Carolina, at my parents' home. And it is just a showstopper each and every spring, each and every summer, and in the fall. And so this is an outstanding plant to put out there. And on our lower side of our gardens at Maplewood Gardens, it's the center focal point. And I've got the moonrise over here, and then I've got my Germain's gyration not too far from it. And those are my two plants that I decided were going to anchor the garden. Those are going to be the plants that command the most attention. And that moonrise, the way it gives you those unique colors and that coarse texture, it brings the attention to where it's at. And it's just a plant that you got to remember, you don't want to put this at the very front of your garden. I mean, if you put this where the macaw was at Maplewood Gardens, you look at it and you don't look at everything else in the garden.
Exactly.
But by putting it out where you enjoy the depth perception of your garden and gives you some vertical interest, coarse texture, and unique colors, it's going to really stand out.
So now we are moving on to First Ghost.
Oh, one of the Ghost series that started them all. This was Talon Buchholz's first Ghost. This was the one that found was a sport off of Akashatsusawa hanging over that looked like a ghost. And then they grafted it and it became First Ghost, and then expired the Ghost series, which, eventually gave a name to Purple Ghost. So, I mean, in its own way, just the history behind this plant, it's mysterious, it's majestic, it's regal. But this plant is also very elegant with its white color. It's very peaceful. But it has those talon-like purple border to it in the early spring. So it gives like this animal-like, creature-like, like claw-like feel to the foliage in the spring as well.
Yeah, First Ghost, what I like about it is because you get some of that green in it, you get those whites, that variegation, and I'll say I think First Ghost, and it's a First Ghost, but that variegation that's on First Ghost, there's nothing else like the Ghost series with that type of variegation. And the first time you see that First Ghost, at least for myself, the first time I saw it, I was like, I didn't even know that was possible. That look from a tree, and like you say, the claw-like leaf structure. That's one of those that you can put that almost anywhere in your garden, with the variegation, with that white, with the green in it, and its growth habit, and the way the leaves look. That's one of those you can almost place that anywhere in your garden. That it's going to add variety. It's going to add that depth, that texture against almost everything. It's like to me, that's First Ghost is the almost all-encompassing Japanese maple.
Best placement in the garden is probably morning sun, afternoon shade. You're going to keep that white longer throughout the season. But you're right, it can go anywhere in the garden. And if you give it that afternoon shade, it's also going to brighten up those darker spaces in that afternoon. And that white with the green reticulated variegation throughout the foliage, and in the springtime with that purple border, gives contrast on itself. But it's a white Japanese maple almost. It's a green Japanese maple. And then it gives you almost like this variegation. I wouldn't consider the purple border a variegation. I consider it more of a border myself. But it gives you this unique style that is very mysterious. And it's very ghost-like. And so it's very aptly named. But the tree itself can be used in so many unique ways. This is a tree that is upright, but is semi-pendulous. And I'm not saying that this is a cascading Japanese maple by any means, but the upright branches arch outward and arch downward as it grows upward. And so this gives a unique structure out there in the garden with its habit that is very unique from many of the other Japanese maples that we just talked about.
And you can also stake this one up to give it even more before it kind of grows out as well.
You definitely can. And being that white color with that unique, very unique style, if you've got somewhere that has that morning sun, afternoon shade, and you have a walkway where you can walk up to this plant and really enjoy the intricacies of that ghost-like variegation, that reticulated style, that's going to be where you're going to really love and enjoy this plant.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, coming up next, we've got our first, what Dr. Creech at SFA Gardens calls the toadstool style of Japanese maples. we've got Acer Palmatum Kiyohime.
Oh, Kiyohime. So this one, like, this morning I was like, let me take look at a picture of one of these and just kind of take a look at it and think about what it invokes in me, what it makes me think about. And those leaves with the red on the border there, it just makes me think of fire, makes me think of like just burning. And in the landscape, when you get that red on the border there, it really just pops so much. So that's one of those in the landscape that I think that you can when it's doing that, you can pair that against other reds, you can pair it against greens, you can pair it against yellows, you can put it at different depths, and then the leaf size of it. I mean, it's just a great plant to throw into the garden.
It really is. It's a great tree that's often used for bonsai. It's great for containers because if it's uniquely lateral and mounding kind of habit, it gives it a very unique structure in the garden. But people often use, like you talked about, boxwoods. Don't use a boring boxwood. I saw at Syrupy Duke Gardens the past fall, when we were at the Maple Society touring their gardens, they used Kiyohime style Japanese maples in the garden in rows, like someone would do a bonsai or someone would use a boxwood. And so essentially you've got these Kiyohimes that are in lines that have this rounded style shape. So you get the amazing spring color out of Kiyohime, you get the amazing fall color that you get out of Kiyohime. But instead of using boring plants, you used a more exciting plant that's going to grab people's attention. And you've used it in a unique way that will make people just be excited. They've never seen something like this before. And that just got me so excited whenever I saw that being done. I was like, that is a very fun way and a unique way to use the style of a Japanese maple.
Absolutely, with that growing pattern. I wish you have pictures of it. I'd love to see pictures of that, because that is so great that you, like you say, using it in place of the boxwood, because I could see with that growing habit as it stays condensed like that, work great with that. That you can line beds with it, you can line walkways with it. That's a great idea.
But let's talk about texture too, because that unique style, that habit, that form really grabs your attention out in the landscape as well. So just putting this in a landscape where if you're mass planting with Japanese maples like we do at Maplewood Gardens, it stands out. And this is an easy plant to use in so many different ways. One of my favorite ways to use Kiyohime, everybody always looks for their Japanese maples to go underneath their window of their living room or their kitchen window. And they'll often choose a selection that gets too tall. But Kiyohime stays low and flat with a spreading habit. And it is an excellent, smaller, shorter Japanese maple that gets some width to it that can fit in that situation and not block your view from your window. So you can enjoy your garden from inside your house, but still have a nice Japanese maple planted up near your house that you can enjoy from outside. So that's something to consider too. It's that perfect kitchen window Japanese maple, the Kiyohime.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we are moving on to Maikujaku.
Guys, we're talking about the dancing peacock. And this is our token Acer japonicum on this list. I mean, this is the reason I wanted to talk about an Acer japonicum is they're amazing, but they give such great coarse texture out there in the landscape that they give this tropical-like feel. And Maikujaku is one of those ones that has that leaf that looks like a peacock if you look displaying its feathers, if you look at the foliage itself. Some of the other Acer japonicum selections may have more rounded foliage, but you can get some really large tropical-like foliage out of many of those as well. And Maikujaku, with that green, vibrant feel, gives you that fresh, that tropical feel, like you're at the beach, like you're in a rainforest. And it has thicker branching. So everything about it is that coarse texture, but some outstanding fall color.
Absolutely. And I think these leaves are really what makes the Maikujaku really pop. Is they're so big, but the way it's shaped, almost like you said, the dancing peacock, those peacock feathers, but they just stand out. And no wonder that whenever these get listed that they immediately go, because those leaves, putting those out in the garden with those big leaves and the way they look, is that the leaf itself is going to do the show for you.
Now, we often get asked, is Meiku and Aconitafolium the same thing? And yes, they are currently in the nursery trade. Meiku is just one of those plants that is just outstanding in each and every season. It's funny because when Matt and I were getting started, everyone told us that it was a green Japanese maple and it wouldn't sell. And for us, it's one of our fastest selling Japanese maples, and everyone comes ask for it by name because it is beautiful. And that's the point about these Japanese maples, is understanding how each of these Japanese maples are beautiful and are different, and how these trees can stand apart from one another. And Meiku definitely does that in an outstanding form. Everything's bigger on the Japonicums. You've got bigger foliage. You've got bigger flowers. Flowers are very prominent in the spring with like this red tassel flowers that hang down and show well against the green foliage. Thicker branching. Fall color appears to last for a longer period of time than some of the palmatums. One of the things that I thought was really exciting about Meiku that we started to learn when Augustin Coelho Vero was here, he did a talk to the Maple Society on senescence, which is the process of a Japanese maple beginning fall color. And sometimes that senescence, that fall color, comes on by cooler temperatures. Now, this cooler temperatures in an area is very inconsistent. What's exciting about Meiku is that the fall color is often based by the day length. So as the day length starts to change, the fall color begins to become more and more, and that senescence starts. And it is outstanding because it's a very consistent fall color provider, because its fall color isn't provided on the inconsistent colder weather, but it's more based on the consistency, which is the day length, which is pretty outstanding.
And that gives you a different time period. So when if you have cool that season, you have some cooler weather earlier, those other maples or the other leaves might kick in to start going to those fall colors, where this one will maintain that green a little bit longer, if that's the case, and give you further into the fall season some of those fall colors.
And sometimes the reverse is true too. Sometimes that fall color happens late for us here in Western North Carolina, and so late that the fall color is shortened, because the fall color comes not too shortly before we have a early frost that then takes off some of the foliage. But Meiku again is based on the timing of the day, how much time is in the day and the length of the day. And because of that, it may have already went through its fall color process at its normal time. So
it's fun.
It's really exciting when you get into some of the intricacies of these plants. Okay, so next up, we've got what is often considered the best fall color Japanese maple. We're talking about Acer palmatum Osakazuki.
You talk about that fall color, the red on that fall color. I think it's very own red. I don't think there's another red out there that you can compare it to. Maybe Fire Glow, but it's
the best. It's the one that all others are compared to is Osakazuki. And it often tricks me because it's a green Japanese maple that is very lively during the summer. It's an excellent tree for Japanese gardening. If you're looking for traditional Japanese gardening, Osakazuki is a fantastic plant for that. It gives you a little bit coarser type foliage, plant it in the background, really enjoy that green foliage, that summery feel, that lively feel. And then in the fall, when it lights up, it does something a little unusual. It often goes to a dark red first, and you'll think that you missed the fall color, because often with Japanese maples, you'll get that brighter colors and then it'll go to darker color. With Osakazuki, it starts off the first few days to a week or first few days as a dark red. And then all of a sudden the light switch turns on and it is just that bright orange red, that fire engine red that just grabs your attention, and it seems crazy. It seems like something out of storybooks. It seems like the Hallmark Channel on fall color. And it is an outstanding fall color Japanese maple that is one of those plants that just gives you something each and every season, But remember, this is a plant for that background. This is a plant that plant it somewhere where you're going to be surprised when that fall color turns on.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the spring and summer colors too. That spring where it's kind of that lighter, and you got some of the little red in the leaves and then it turns into gets to that green, and it's not that dark green, but it's got a great green color to it that you can contrast with other greens in there, but then once fall comes and the show is on.
It really is. And before that fall color, you've got red samaras, which are the seeds that hang over the green foliage. Contrast really nicely on the Sakazuki as well. All around awesome plant.
Absolutely. So here's one for all you that still have the childlike aspect inside of you. Peve starfish.
Guys, this is such a fun plant. The texture is really unique because the leaves on this dark red Japanese maple curl downward like a starfish. So it seems like an animal. It seems very lively. This is a plant that's going to get kids into gardening because you can tell them, hey, check out the starfish tree. And they're going to go and enjoy and try to check out that tree each and every day because of how fun and exciting this tree is and how different it is from everything else in your garden.
Absolutely. When those leaves curl, I mean, the starfish name is they look like starfish. That's what they look like. That's why when they look at it, they are immediately going to recognize that. This was probably Peve starfish, I want to say was maybe second or third tree that Japanese maple I purchased. And that's exactly why I purchased it, is because when I look at that, it makes me feel like a kid again.
I know why you love plants a lot now. You like the Makawi Atsubusa because it feels like a kid. You like the Peve starfish because it makes you feel like a kid. You just want to feel like a kid inside all the time.
Who wants to grow up?
It really feels like you're in Never Land because it has this animal-like appeal, and it is a good 6 to 8 foot upright red in 10 years. So it's a small to mid-sized Japanese maple, and so it fits in a lot of smaller spaces because of that. But that dark red foliage gives it this sort of sophisticated classic feel, but then it's cute and fun at the same time because of that texture.
And with the colors as well, the new growth. So we've got that kind of that reddish color on the Peve starfish, but that new growth, you can almost kind of throw the new growth into the pink or purple category. Mine at the house right now is starting to hit that summer flush that's growing up, and the purple that from that new growth that's pushing off is what's pushing the show right now. It's an amazing plant.
So this plant, because of that curled foliage, has that sort of medium to coarse foliage. Plant this next to your fine textured Japanese maples. Plant this next to your fine textured green Japanese maples, or your medium textured yellow. Don't plant this a lot around other red Japanese maples because you'll lose some of the color contrast that accentuates the contrast with the foliage. And when you do that, this is going to be a plant that's going to draw a little more attention. Again, this is a plant you're going to want to be able to enjoy up close because that texture is so amazing, and it's so uniquely different than all the other Japanese maples. I think Trompenberg was one of the first selections of a red Japanese maple that had foliage that cut down a little bit. And it's a little less cupped down than Peve starfish. Peve starfish is extremely cupped. It's a selection by Piet Vergelt, and Piet Vergelt has introduced so many amazing selections, but I think even though he introduced American, I think Peve starfish is one of my favorite selections from him because this is such a fun and uniquely different Japanese maple. And the fall colors on this are a bright red as well. I mean, there's some outstanding fall colors on Peve starfish.
Absolutely. I like with the Peve starfish, it is one where if you've never seen one, you are immediately going to be drawn to it.
That is for certain. So guys, we got to talk about a strap leaf Japanese maple in this because they have such an important role in the garden. And so let's talk about a few. We've got Koto no Ito next.
So this what really stands out with these are the fact that the texture, This is all about texture, I think, with this tree. I mean, you got the colors, but the texture with this tree, with as small as those leaves are and the growth habit, uh, it really makes me think of, like, if you have these, like, that bamboo feeling in the garden.
That is for certain. Koto no Ito, the name means Japanese harp string, and its foliage is very strap-like. So the foliage is very long, pointed, and elongated, and it gives a bamboo-like feel out in the garden. And because of that elongated foliage that's very strap-like, the overall appearance of a tree is a little more open and airy. And because of that, it gives you a very unique texture in the garden. It gives you a cloud-like appearance out there in the garden, a bamboo-like appearance out there in the garden. And if you're not familiar what a linerlobum is, or that strap leaf style foliage, go to our YouTube channel and check out our video we did on what is a linerlobum Japanese maple. We try to describe it and so people can understand more about what that actually is. Koto no Ito has that green feel. It's got that lime green color. It gives you that very natural, that lively, that calm, that fresh feel. But with that open, airy habit, I mean, it really feels like you could just lay a blanket underneath it and watch the foliage blow in the wind all day.
And you bring that up with the wind, and that's exactly what I was just thinking of. Is when the wind hits this, it hits it in a different way than it hits other maples. To me, it's almost like when the wind hits it, it almost makes me think of wind chimes with the way they move. I mean, it's a really, we're just talking about Koto no Ito.
Yeah.
There's others out there with that same type of growth habit, but we can incorporate different colors as well.
That's for sure. I know one that's one of your favorites, one of my favorites, is such an amazing Japanese maple.
Yellow threads. There's nothing, and I almost say, I was telling Tim earlier, I said yellow threads. Calling it yellow threads is almost, it should be called golden threads, because that yellow on that is, to me, is more like, there's a point in the season where it's more of a golden yellow that just pops. And then you got, like you said, those long leaves, and the way the wind hits it, there's not much like it.
Now, one thing I've learned about yellow threads, give it some sunlight, at least morning sunlight, to really brighten up and pick up those colors on yellow threads. It gives you that same strap-like leaf foliage. It's a little bit shorter than Koto no Ito, and it has a little bit more where Koto no Ito has those harp strings, those really thin, extremely thin foliage. Yellow threads has more of that traditional strap-like leaf foliage, which is more and more bamboo-like. So it's really like yellow bamboo out there in the landscape. It's awesome when you get a larger one of those out there and you can really look up into it and you feel like you're in a bamboo forest.
And absolutely. And with those, again, with depth, you take something like that and then put something with a big leaf behind it. It's going to make it even pop even more.
Some of the Japonicums?
Oh, yeah. Stick that behind it with, it's going to pop.
And with yellow threads giving you that yellow lively feel, that cheerful, playful-like appearance with that yellow color, and then having those strap-like leaves that can give you that sort of essence of Japan, like a traditional Japanese gardening. This is just a fun one to play out with out in the landscape and garden. Again, put this in your midground to your background so that it doesn't steal all the attention up front. You want something shorter and something that's going to be more of typically in those green or traditional red colors, more on those up close colors. That yellow, be careful where you put it, but when you need it, you need yellow threads out there in the landscape to really brighten up the rest of the colors and add good color contrast.
And again, there's so many, like with these, like I say, we've got different, you think of antrilinear, punkill. So if they're, again, with all of these, if there's color or space, there's always going to be one in that category that you can kind of fine tune it for the space you have and for the colors you're looking for.
So we've talked about a lot of other, some of our top Japanese maples, but let's talk about a collector plant for a second. What types of moods do you feel when you see Acer palmatum purple curls?
Oh, purple curl. Is there anything else? I mean, I know I said, is there anything else like it? But purple curl. So I've got one at the house right now, and the new growth is still that flat kind of green color. And my wife said to me, you might want to take a look at that. It's getting a little crispy and doing some colors. No, that's what it's supposed to do. It's what it's supposed to do. Those colors, I mean, yellow, purple,
Some orange kind of colors.
Yeah, I mean, like just like in that one leaf, like how many colors can be in just one leaf? Like it's almost like the rainbow in one leaf.
Purple Curl is a selection by Talon Buchholz. It's one of those plants that's an extreme collector plant. It has curled foliage that is kind of purple with a malting variegation. There's not much else like it. And that yellow to orange you're talking about that comes in the leaf is really fun. And for a collector, it gets your heart beating and you're like, wow, this is so different. This is so unique. But some of these plants, Talon Buchholz says, it's only a plant that a mother could love or a collector could love because it is so uniquely different that it's not your traditional Japanese maple. But that's what I love about it. And that's one of the reasons why if you have something like that, you're going to plant it up close. Because if it's something that gets your heart beating, put it up close, grow it in a container, grow it somewhere close to your house because it is very uniquely different and something really special.
Yeah, and you don't want to let that get lost in everything else that's going. Like you say, plant that up close, something you can see. So I say, my wife, you might want to take a look at that. Something's going on with it. No, it's supposed to do that. It's supposed to do that. So, I mean, it gives you color, it gives you texture, it gives you all those things, the way that the leaves kind of curl and do it. I mean, it gives you everything in the garden.
So, guys, I hope you've gotten something from today's really unique color psychology, textures, and how to use these Japanese maples in your garden to really enjoy gardening, get those health benefits of gardening out there in your garden, and really enjoy everything you can enjoy about Japanese maples.
Absolutely. And like I said, I've said it before, but I really, really enjoy the fact that this is all about foliage, about texture, color, and all the things you can do with just foliage. And we're just talking about Japanese maples here, that you can really do an entire garden if you wanted to with just Japanese maples and have something happening all year long with different colors, all different. Your garden could perform all year long with all these different Japanese maples. And we just talked about 20 of them that kind of fit those categories. So again, don't be afraid to look at your area, look at it as a blank canvas. If you need to take a picture of it and think about it, but give us a call here at Mr. Maple or send us an email. We'll be happy to help you kind of pick a plant. If you're looking for something, I'm looking for these characteristics, this is the space I have, we'll help you find the appropriate tree for that.
And remember, if you're passionate and you love Japanese maples as much as we do, make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube show. We do daily YouTube videos. We do weekly podcasts, so make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform. And if you can give us a 5-star, we'd appreciate it. It helps more people find us. And guys, lastly, we'd really appreciate if you shopped with us on MrMaple.com. We work really hard to put out daily content for you. We work really hard to share our passion of gardening with you, and I hope you'll enjoy our Japanese maples.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.